Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something that really matters? Something that affects how we, as public servants, can better serve Canadians, especially in this digital world.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the Directive on Service and Digital from the Government of Canada.
Yeah.
It's a key document, but trust me, it's not just some boring list of rules.
Oh, definitely not.
This is like a framework, a way of thinking about service and tech and information.
And how all those things can put citizens front and center.
Exactly. Putting citizens first. That's the key.
And that's what I find so interesting about this directive. It goes beyond just, the procedures.
Yeah.
It's really about changing our mindset. It's about understanding the needs of the people we serve.
Okay, so less about checking boxes and more about really understanding the citizen's experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's like instead of just processing applications, we're thinking, how can we make this whole experience better for the person on the other end?
Putting ourselves in their shoes.
Yeah.
So how does that client-centric approach actually play out in our everyday work?
Well, think of it this way. Every interaction, every decision we make,
Yeah,
it's a chance to improve someone's experience with the government.
I like that.
It's about asking, if I was applying for this benefit or needing this information,
Right.
what would make this process easier, more understandable for me?
So it's like a constant feedback loop. How are we doing? Can we do better?
Yeah. And the directive actually has this built-in opportunity for reflection,
Right.
with the mandatory 5-year review of services.
Okay, so it's a chance to take a step back and ask, is this service really meeting people's needs?
Yeah. Is there a way to make it more user-friendly, especially in this digital age?
A built-in chance to improve things. So for those of you listening, how can you bring this client-centric mindset into your own role, even if you're not, on the front lines?
It's all about bringing that empathy to everything you do. Like if you're writing a memo, think about how that information is going to be received.
Yeah.
How will your colleagues or the public understand it? Could it be clearer, more concise?
That's a good point.
Or if you're working on a new digital service, are you thinking about those who might not be so tech savvy? People with disabilities.
It's easy to get lost in the day-to-day and forget the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And speaking of the bigger picture, this directive is really big on information and data.
Absolutely. It sees information as a valuable asset
Okay.
and stresses managing information strategically,
So what does that mean?
making sure it's accurate, up to date,
Uh-huh.
accessible in a way that makes sense to people.
Okay.
It's not just about collecting data, it's about using it to improve things, to make better decisions.
This ties into the whole digital side of things, right?
Yeah.
The directive prefers digital systems for managing information. Why is that?
Well, digital systems help us break down those silos that can pop up between departments.
Oh, I see.
They allow for information sharing, collaboration,
Right.
which ultimately leads to better, more efficient services for Canadians.
So instead of each department having its own separate system,
Right.
we're moving towards a more integrated approach.
Exactly. The directive really pushes for what's called interoperability.
Interoperability.
It means that different systems can talk to each other. Imagine a citizen applying for a benefit and their information automatically populates different forms across departments.
Wow.
That's the power of interoperability. It makes things seamless, saves everyone time and effort.
That makes total sense. And of course, we have to make sure that information is accessible to everyone
Absolutely.
in formats that are easy to understand, easy to use.
Right. This might mean offering information in multiple languages, having alternative formats for people with disabilities, or even just writing things in plain language that everyone can understand.
Makes sense. So we've got the client-centric approach, strategic use of information, digital tools.
Yeah.
It's all about making the government experience better for citizens.
Yeah. Exactly. More citizen-friendly, more efficient. And to do that, we can't forget about technology.
Okay.
The directive has a lot to say about leveraging tech effectively.
So give us the rundown. How does the directive want us to use technology?
Well, for one, it puts a big emphasis on cloud services.
Okay.
It's a shift away from those traditional IT setups,
So we're talking about.
moving to a model where we're using a network of servers managed by third-party providers, like Amazon or Microsoft.
Okay. I've heard of the cloud, but for those of us who aren't tech experts, can you explain it simply?
Sure, think of it this way. Instead of having a library in your house for all your books, you're using a giant shared library that everyone can access from anywhere.
Ah.
It's more flexible, scalable, and often more cost-effective.
So instead of owning and maintaining our own server rooms,
Right.
we're essentially renting space in a giant secure data center.
Exactly. And this frees up our IT teams. They can focus on developing innovative applications, improving the user experience,
Okay,
instead of just keeping the lights on.
that makes sense. And this connects back to the idea of managing at-risk technology, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Using outdated tech is risky, like driving with bald tires. The directive pushes us to phase out anything that's a security risk or just not meeting our needs anymore.
Stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah. Especially in a world where technology changes so rapidly.
Now, there's another big piece of the puzzle here, cybersecurity.
Right.
How does the directive approach this, especially in a world full of digital risks?
The directive is very clear. Cybersecurity is not just an IT issue, it's everyone's responsibility.
Right that.
We're talking about protecting information, maintaining public trust, ensuring essential services stay up and running.
Okay, so it's not just about firewalls. What's the approach?
It's a continuous cycle of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover.
Okay.
We start by understanding the risks. What kind of information do we have? What are the threats? Then we put safeguards in place. But we also need to be ready to detect if something goes wrong, respond quickly, and recover.
So it's ongoing, not a one-time fix. How can we all, as public servants, contribute to a strong cybersecurity culture?
It starts with the basics. Strong passwords, watching out for phishing emails, reporting anything that seems suspicious. But it's also about being aware of the risks, taking personal responsibility for protecting sensitive information.
Building a culture where cybersecurity is everyone's business. And the directive actually goes into more detail in its appendices, right?
Yeah, they provide more specific standards and procedures.
I
Well, there's guidance on acceptable and unacceptable use of networks and devices.
So things like no downloading movies on your work computer.
Exactly. It covers social media use, personal email, connecting personal devices to the government network.
Got it.
It's all about managing risk using common sense.
And there's stuff about privacy and monitoring, right?
Absolutely. There's an appendix about how online activity might be monitored and the rules around protecting privacy. It's important for everyone to be aware of those guidelines and use government resources responsibly.
So these appendices really show that this directive has a real impact on our everyday work. It's not just a document sitting on a shelf.
Exactly. It gives us practical guidance on how to apply the principles to specific situations.
Okay. So far, we've covered a lot. Client-centric service, information management, technology, cybersecurity. What are the key takeaways here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this directive gives us a roadmap for thinking about service, information, and technology in a way that truly benefits citizens.
It's about using our expertise and the tools we have to make a positive difference in the lives of Canadians.
Absolutely. It's a call to action for all of us to embrace this client-centric, digital-first approach to service delivery.
To constantly be striving for improvement, innovation, excellence in everything we do.
Precisely. The directive sets the stage, but it's up to us to put these principles into action, to use our expertise and creativity to make a real difference. It's fascinating how this directive connects back to something we talked about before, keeping our technology up to date. The directive has all these requirements around at-risk technology.
Right, we did touch on that. It's about making sure our systems are safe and reliable. Like, we wouldn't drive a car with bald tires.
Exactly.
But can you remind us what at-risk technology actually means in this context?
Well, it's any technology that's outdated, no longer supported by the developer, or, poses a security risk.
Okay.
Think like an old operating system or software that's not getting security updates anymore.
Ah, I see.
Basically anything that could make it harder to deliver services to Canadians, effective services, secure services.
So it's like using that old flip phone when everyone else has moved on to smartphones, right?
Exactly. You might be able to make calls, but you're missing out on all the new features. And you're putting yourself at risk.
And in a government context, those risks are pretty significant.
Yeah.
We're talking about protecting sensitive information,
Absolutely.
making sure essential services can stay up and running.
Right. And maintaining the public's trust.
High stakes. So how does the directive actually guide departments in managing all this at-risk technology?
Yeah.
It's one thing to say get rid of the old stuff, but actually doing it can be complicated.
True, it can be a complex process. But the directive provides a framework. You start by taking inventory, figuring out what technology you actually have, and, assessing its current state.
Okay.
It's like taking stock of your toolbox and seeing what needs an upgrade or a replacement.
So we're not just throwing everything out and starting from scratch.
No.
There's a process.
Absolutely, a thoughtful process. And once you have a clear picture of what you're working with, then you can develop a plan for phasing out that at-risk stuff, replacing it with modern, secure alternatives. And this goes beyond just buying new computers or software.
Right, you've got budget considerations, training needs, migrating all the data.
Exactly, it requires a strategic approach.
Hmm.
And the directive really emphasizes collaboration, communication. Departments can work with Shared Services Canada, for example, to get the expertise and support they need.
So leverage resources and knowledge from across the government.
Yeah.
I imagine there's also a focus on talking to the people who actually use this technology every day.
You're absolutely right. We need to understand their needs and try to minimize any disruption during the transition. It's about bringing everyone along on this journey.
It's a very people-centric
It
process.
is.
Now, I noticed the directive mentions standardized configurations
Yeah.
and enterprise-wide solutions. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. It's essentially about creating a more consistent and, interoperable IT environment across the government.
Okay.
Think of it like this. Instead of each department having its own unique set of systems, its own configurations,
Yeah.
we're moving towards common standards, shared platforms.
So instead of a patchwork of different technologies, we're going for a more streamlined approach.
Exactly. Great analogy.
Thanks.
And this has several benefits. For one, it makes it much easier to manage and support everything. Troubleshooting, security updates, making sure things are compatible. It all becomes easier when everyone's on the same page.
Makes sense. And I bet it saves money, too.
Absolutely. By taking advantage of those economies of scale, negotiating government-wide agreements, we can reduce costs and avoid unnecessary duplication.
Working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. But of course, some departments have very specific needs, maybe specialized systems. Does the directive allow for any flexibility there?
Yeah, good question.
Absolutely. It recognizes that in some cases, departments will need to deviate from those standard configurations, maybe use different solutions, but the directive lays out clear procedures for requesting those exceptions.
So it's about finding that balance, right,
Uh-huh.
between standardization and flexibility.
Yeah, always keeping in mind the best interests of the citizens we serve.
It all comes back to that client centricity,
It does.
putting citizens first,
Yeah.
making sure technology serves them, not the other way around.
Exactly. It's about empowering people with technology, not creating barriers.
And that brings us to another important piece, data.
Data.
We've talked about technology services,
Mhm.
but data is that underlying foundation. How does the directive guide departments in managing this super valuable asset?
Well, it encourages a comprehensive approach, focusing on principles like openness, interoperability, and security.
Hmm.
It's about making sure data is accessible, reusable, but also safeguarded.
So balancing openness with security.
Exactly, making sure data is used for good while protecting privacy and preventing harm. The directive really promotes a culture of data sharing, collaboration across the government, breaking down those silos, helping us see that bigger picture.
It's pretty amazing to think about how data can help us connect the dots,
Yeah.
deliver better services to Canadians.
It is. And as technology keeps evolving, our ability to collect data, analyze it, and use it responsibly will only become more important.
And that's where the directive's emphasis on digital skills comes in, right?
Okay.
Building capacity in the workforce.
Absolutely.
We need people who can not only use the technology, but really understand data and how to work with it effectively.
Right. The directive recognizes that we need a workforce with the right skills and knowledge, a workforce that can navigate this digital world and really harness the power of data.
So it's about investing in training, professional development,
Yeah, creating that culture of continuous learning.
empowering public servants at all levels to be comfortable with data, to understand its potential, and use it ethically and responsibly to improve the lives of Canadians.
Absolutely.
And on that note of empowerment and positive change, let's move on to the last part of our deep dive and explore some practical ways you can apply this directive in your own work. Welcome back. As we wrap up our look at this directive on service and digital, I want to talk about how it's changing the way we actually deliver services to Canadians.
One thing that stands out to me is how it encourages us to move away from that one-size-fits-all approach to service delivery.
Yeah.
It recognizes that today, people have different needs, different expectations, different comfort levels with technology.
Definitely. Think about our own lives, right?
Yeah.
We bank online, shop online, order food online. We're used to having information and services available all the time whenever we need them.
Exactly. And the directive acknowledges that. Government services need to catch up to those expectations. It's about meeting people where they are, offering them options, making things as convenient as possible, as user-friendly as possible.
Less paperwork, shorter lines, more digital options. Sounds great, but can you give us some real-world examples of how the directive is actually changing things?
Sure, we're seeing a big shift towards online applications for government services. Things like applying for a passport, renewing your driver's license, accessing benefits.
Yeah.
These are all things that are increasingly moving online, making them more efficient and accessible for everyone.
And I imagine that frees up public servants to focus on more complex cases or give more personalized support to those who need it.
Exactly, working smarter, not harder. Another example is the growing use of digital communication channels. Instead of just phone calls or letters, departments are using email, text messages, even chatbots to get information out there and answer questions more quickly.
It's all about using those channels that people are already comfortable with, right?
Exactly, and these digital channels actually allow for more targeted communication.
How so?
We can use data analytics to understand which channels work best for different groups of people, so we can tailor our outreach to meet their specific needs.
So using tech strategically to really improve the citizen experience.
Right. And that brings us to another important aspect, measuring how well our services are performing and then using that information to make them better.
That feedback loop,
Yeah.
constantly learning and adapting based on what we hear from citizens.
Yeah, exactly. The directive really encourages departments to gather data.
Yeah.
Data on how people are using the services, their satisfaction, overall performance.
And then use that to make decisions.
Right, decisions about how we design and improve those services.
So we're talking things like online surveys, user testing, maybe even looking at social media to see what people are saying.
All of that. And getting direct feedback from citizens, too, through contact centers or email. It's about being proactive,
Yeah.
seeking feedback, rather than just waiting for complaints to come in.
Got it. And of course, we have to talk about accessibility and inclusion.
Oh, absolutely. Essential.
These digital services need to be available to everyone, no matter their age, abilities, language, or technical skills.
Absolutely. And the directive is very strong on this point.
Okay.
It encourages us to design services that are usable by people with disabilities, providing information in multiple languages, offering different formats for people who need them.
Breaking down those barriers, making sure everyone has equal access to government services.
Exactly. And it's not just about meeting some checklist of accessibility standards. It's about creating a user experience that is truly inclusive, truly welcoming.
You know, as we finish up this deep dive, I'm really struck by how this directive is about so much more than just rules. It's really a change in how we think about service in this digital age.
It is. It's a call to action for all of us in the public service, to embrace new ways of working, to see technology as something that helps us, and to put the needs of citizens at the center of everything we do.
Recognizing the power we have to make a real difference in people's lives.
Exactly. By following the principles in this directive, by using our skills and our creativity, we can build a government that is more responsive, more efficient, and more focused on citizens.
The directive gives us the roadmap, but it's our journey to take.
And we all need to work together to make Canada better.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Man.
This wraps up our deep dive into the directive on service and digital. Thanks for joining us.